Hello, family. As requested by, I believe, Ian, who wanted to see some bread baking happen, I agreed to go ahead or I volunteered, or I should say, I volunteered to go ahead and show you what I do to make a really basic oatmeal bread that is an everyday bread and really super adaptable. So I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to show you my first step in that right now before things really get going. So I start out with 1.5 cups of filtered water and 1.5 cups of milk. So you've got 3 cups of liquid, and any kind of milk will do. Of course, I use a dairy-free version, whatever I happen to have on hand. Honestly, I've never noticed a difference between almond milk, rice milk, oat milk, soy milk, nothing. It doesn't matter. In fact, you could just use either all milk or all water. And oh, by the way, on the water, what I often do, because I'm my mother's daughter, is any water that I have cooked potatoes particularly in, carrots, a lot of peas, any kind of vegetables that are not cruciferous, such as Brussels sprouts or broccoli or cauliflower, I save that water and I will use it for this recipe or any of my bread recipes. So take note. And then I'm gonna put that in my pan, la 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 la, like so. This is really complicated, you know. Turn it on to high, boop. And then when it's boiling, comes to a boil, I then add in 1.5 cups of oatmeal. Now again, this is super adaptable. This is actually a 2/3 version of my usual recipe because I've learned this makes 4 pounds of bread dough. So I can either make 2 2-pound loaves, which is a normal 3 by, what is that, a 4 by 9, 3 by 8, I don't know, man. Anyway, normal loaf size loaf of bread. Or I've been making the smaller bread using these smaller bread pans, which fill a 1 pound loaf of bread. And those are super handy. For those of you like Ian, Jessica, anyone else with kids at home, or you're going through a lot of bread, these are gonna be too small. But I don't eat enough of it. Ian eats it, most of the time. So I go with the smaller stuff. The rest goes in the freezer when I'm done. Okay, so this is kind of a passive way to cook the oatmeal. What I like about this is that I'm not sitting here standing over the stove. Well, I am right now, but I won't be for long. Most of this bread that the activity that I'm doing making this bread is just in little spurts. 10 minutes here, 2 minutes there. Nothing takes very long, which I am all about that. Maximum benefit with very little output on my part. All right, so because I have an induction range, this fluid comes to a boil really rapidly, and it's almost there. I love this. And ooh, let's not forget, look who's watching. It's Tiny Chef. Okay, so that's that. How are y'all doing? Notice I got my Atlanta shirt on. Yay! And stick my boobs in front of the camera. So as soon as it comes to a boil, I may be cutting some of this out, I'm thinking. So what will happen is, and there we go. All right. So I'm just going to add the oatmeal, stir it up a little bit, put the lid on, turn it off. What? And then I just let it sit for however long it takes for me to come back and finish this bread. Because soaking in that hot fluid, you know, really a minimum of even 30 minutes to an hour. And it's enough to get this party started. I'll be back. Bye. Here we go. So you can see they're pretty well cooked. Let's get them closer. But now they need to cool off. So I'm gonna leave the lid off. Let that cool off a little bit because right now it's too hot, and I'll be back shortly to make the bread. Okay, back again. Hello everyone. So my oats have cooked and have cooled off. Before I go any further with those, what I've done is heated up some water. Seems about the right temperature. The right temperature being between 90 to 115 degrees. And I highly recommend, if all y'all do not have a Thermapen instant read thermometer, you should get one. It's worth the money. So according to my instant read thermometer, this is at 98 degrees. Oh, now it's dropping. So to that, what I like to do, is add a little sorghum syrup that I bought at a local place. I take that back. I think I got it in West Virginia. Anyway, so I just dip my whisk in there, grab a little bit, throw it into my water with my yeast that I buy by the pound and keep in the freezer in this container. And for this amount of flour to yeast ratio, as I'm doing my 2/3 recipe, I do a tablespoon and a half of yeast. So, and sprinkle it over the water, like so. Can't see where the water is because my camera is limited. And then you want to make sure that you stir the yeast into the water so that it blends in and blends in with the sorghum syrup. You don't have to use sorghum syrup. Barley syrup, honey, pinch of sugar, agave syrup, just a little dash of it in there helps the yeast bacteria blossom. You know, you guys know yeast. You make your own beer. You do wine. You do cider. All of that. All right. So that's gonna sit there and bubble and brew. And while that's doing that, I'm gonna start getting the rest of my ingredients together. Now this is where I don't really measure anymore after this. I just kind of do it by feel. So when I put my recipe together, I will put amounts, but I just kind of dump shit in, as it feels right to me. So I prefer using honey in this bread, or most breads anyway, rather than straight up sugar. I don't know. I just feel like the texture's better, the flavor's better. Ooh, but it makes it really hard. Okay, hold on. Gotta stop. Oh shit. Okay. So this took a lot to get off. Holy crap, man. It was brutal. All right. So this is so bad. Anyway, I just put in what feels right to me. I don't like my bread. See, big dollop. It's probably, and I normally say about 1/4 cup, but honestly, whether I'm making the 2/3 version of this bread or the full version, which would be 4 cups of fluid and 2 cups of oats, I more or less add the same amount. Okay, same with oil. I no longer use canola oil. I don't know why. It kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies anymore. So I use safflower oil or nuts. There's another one. I can't think of right at the moment. But anyway, same idea. Blug, 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 blug. You know, 3 to 4 tablespoons of oil. And then I go ahead and add, oil, honey, salt. Yeah, you gotta have your sweet, your fat, and your salt in this sandwich bread. Lots of breads you don't, but in this one, you do. It will make a nice, lighter, better better textured bread. It won't have the holes and whatnot. It'll be more evenly dispersed in terms of the texture, all that good stuff. Okay, so now I'm mixing all that in and dumping it into my mixing bowl. Ta-da! And make sure you get all the goobers, because that's what makes it really good. Nom. All right. And then this is where I also get a little, this is a very flexible bread. So I normally add, and I will right today, whole wheat flour, at least a good amount. Whoops, that's bread flour. Whole wheat flour. Because I want to boost up the whole grain aspect of this along with the oatmeal. So in this instance, I'm going to add a cup and a half. Oh, I guess I said I wasn't going to measure anymore, but guess what? I just did. Anyway, add what you want. But I have tons of different kinds of flours because I think it's fun to experiment with them. So sometimes I will add barley flour, rye flour. I really love rye flour in almost any kind of bread. Oat flour. I love triticale flour, but boy, I haven't been able to find it lately. Then I start adding bread flour. After this, it's strictly bread, white, unbleached bread flour. This happens to be King Arthur Excalibur, I think. I don't know, man. I get it 50 pounds a bag from a cooking Baker's Authority. That's it. But this is a higher gluten, higher protein version. And it is the bomb for making bread, let me tell you. So I go ahead and add cup and a half into my slumgullion to get that going. And then salt. Salt is essential. I have made this bread without salt a time or two. It didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. It turned out, well, A, bland, and B, it really affects the texture, which I didn't know that. Anyway, so in this instance, I'm burping, 1.5 tablespoons of salt. That seems like a lot, but I'm pretty sure it's because of the oatmeal, and we are going to have a lot of flour in here altogether. It's probably going to end up being, I don't know, 5-ish cups of flour. I never measured it. That absorbs a lot of salt, kind of like potatoes. Remember Karen's potato salad recipe? Same idea. And now, while I've been doing that, look what that sorghum syrup did. Isn't that beautiful? Look how foofy that got. Fun. So, I'm going to go ahead and add my yeast mixture to everything else. And then, what I like to do, I've kind of caught on to this, is, well, first, I'm going to add some more water here. Kind of doesn't matter how much water you add. You can always make up for it with more flour. And you've got enough yeast in there. It'll do its thing. Trust me. Trust me. You do want good yeast though. Don't be using that stupid in a packet yeast. It's not as good. Ooh, I thought I heard lightning. It's raining. It looks like Washington out there right now, just so you know. Okay. So what I've started, I don't know what I just did. I thought I'd stop the camera. Apparently that had not happened. Okay, so I've added all my goobers into the bowl. And now, since I'm using a KitchenAid, this is a paddle attachment, by the way, for any of you who were not aware of that. That's what that's called. Whereas this is a dough hook. Now what I'm going to do, and I started doing this when I started making more artisan type breads, They tell you a lot of times that when you initially beat the bread to go ahead and beat it fairly hard, and especially if it's in a mixer, for about a minute. If you're doing it by hand, which I don't recommend doing that because it's really exhausting. I've done it. I can do one loaf at a time, but this much, it's more like 2 minutes or longer. Now, be careful. Like mine is the super heavy duty KitchenAid. You can overbeat the bread. You can overstimulate the gluten. Well, stimulate. I don't know, man. You can beat the gluten. Now it's starting to sound dirty. Anyway, you can overdo it. And that's not good. You don't want to overbeat the gluten. Do you ever really want to overbeat anything? Probably not. All right, so moving on. I'm going to mix it a little bit first just to make sure everything gets incorporated. And now I'm going to let it fly. Okay, I'm finishing up the hardcore beating. And I'm going to turn it off. Scrape down the bowl. And just so you get an idea, it's really loosey-goosey right now. It is very, very, very sticky. It's just a mash, more or less. So, need to add more flour. And this is where, as I said, I strictly add white bread flour after this. So away I go. I add about half a cup at a time. My mixer operates really quickly. Did I mention I have the super duper heavy duty one? That's the DC motor versus the AC motor. I know. I'm fancy. So I keep adding the flour. And you know what? I'm going to move the camera so you can see inside the bowl. Hold on. There you go. Now you can kind of see what kind of texture we're talking about. You can see that the dough is still really adhering to the sides of the bowl and to the paddle. I will keep adding flour until the dough starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl. You do see that in recipes all the time, right? You also see how the gluten is starting to form and get going because the dough is starting to pull and stretch along the edges there. That's it. You do want to be careful though and not add too much flour at any stage, because the last thing you want to do is add too much flour. It will just make your bread dry and hard. And that's why I'm starting to learn after how many years? 35 years of making bread? 40? I don't know. To not add too much flour. It's taken me a long time to get there. I don't know why. It's so obvious. So see how it's starting to pull away from the edges of the bowl a little bit? I'm going to go a little bit further. Not at quite a half a cup this time. You can see how it's starting to goober up a little bit more, get a little more solid. And you see it pull away a little bit more. And this is a stage, I'm going to let it run just a little bit longer. That's perfect. So it's at this stage that I'm going to go ahead and pull my bowl down. I'm going to remove the dough from the paddle attachment. And I'm going to go ahead and put, well, we'll see. We'll see how it feels. A lot of times anymore, in fact, almost every time, I like to finish the bread by hand because then I can really feel whether or not it's getting bouncy, because that's the texture and feel I want under my hands. Sorry. When I know the dough has enough, the gluten has worked its magic enough, it has enough flour, it's not getting sticky, but it still has a little bit of tackiness to it. I've also learned though that a lot of times if you just let the dough rest when you think it's maybe a little bit too tacky, you've kneaded it for a little while, and you feel like it's just not working, that every time you add flour it just absorbs it and it's still tacky, let it rest for a while, like 10 minutes, uncovered, let it just sit there on the counter, and you'd be surprised. It will have allowed itself to absorb more of the flour and you don't need to add any more. But this is still too close to the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and add more flour using the dough hook, as I described before. I'm going to go ahead and move the camera again so you can see inside the bowl better. So you can see I just added maybe 1/3 of a cup of flour, and look how that really has cohesed into a nice ball of dough. It's at this stage, okay, I add a little bit more flour. I like to let it go for a little bit to see if it's going to start collapsing down to the bottom. I like to stop it every once in a while and give it a feel. And see, it's just, can you see how it's really still sticking? But it's getting really close for me to take it out. Not quite. So if you notice, it's starting to throw off with the dough hook little pieces of dough that will then kind of knead their way around the bowl, and then it'll throw up like it's cabbing, right? And then it reabsorbs it again. It's actually a good sign. Okay, so I just let it go another couple of seconds, and it looks like it is ready to come out of the bowl. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the dough hook. Get all the dough. Take a little taste. And I'm gonna move my camera again. All right, back at it. So, removed everything else off my counter since I only have this tiny little counter space. And I'm going to decant the the dough from the bowl onto the counter using my handy dandy scraper, which if you don't have one of these, you need to get one. You also need the flat edged one for scraping off the counter and cutting things. They're the best. So you can see this came out pretty whole. So I have a feeling I probably shouldn't even have used this much flour on the counter. But I'm just gonna do the last bit of kneading for this bread by hand. You saw I took off my sweater because this is hot work. And again, my mixer really does a good job of kneading it. It took me a while to understand just how good of a job, and I was beating things in there way too long, and it kind of just destroyed stuff. So I've learned to not take much time with it. and then hand do the rest of it so I can really get a feel and make sure I don't add too much flour. And in fact, I almost wonder if I haven't, but it still feels a little tacky, which is nice. But ooh, so what it's doing, what I'm feeling under my hands right now with this dough, you can see it's nice and smooth, but it is a little bit sticky. That's good. And what's happening is, and you can see it's kind of retaining its shape. Also, let's do the little pull test. If you pull a little dough out and it goes back, see, it's taking a little while for it to pull back. It should do it more rapidly if the gluten has worked enough. So that tells me I need to knead a little bit longer. But I will also say it feels really bouncy under my hands. It has a lot of flexibility, not flexibility, but resistance, which tells me that the gluten has worked quite a bit. And it's a good amount of flour in here. It's just right. So that's good. You can do the opposite test with your dough if you want to make sure that the gluten has worked enough. So rather than pulling, see this pulling a little bit faster, you can push into it and see how it's recovering, but it needs a little bit more. Ian, are these the tips you were looking for? This is also my arm workout. And I'm probably going to edit out a lot of this because it's really boring. But hey, how about Georgia turning blue, huh? You're welcome. That's why Uncle Ian and I had to move here. We've never felt our votes mattered so much before in our lives. Notice how I'm not really adding any more flour at all. I feel like, I mean, you can't see it, but my counter is almost clear of any residue at all. I can feel it, but I can't see it, which is good. And it is nice and a little bit tacky, but it's really holding its form. All right, let's try that again. Ooh, that's coming back really nicely. I don't know if you saw that when I pushed it, but that almost becomes invisible. All right, we're good. So what I'm doing then is I'm going to dump it into this handy dandy dough rising bin, which I bought entirely by accident because I needed a big container to put Chex Mix in for our trip out to Washington. I usually do this, I used to do this all the time in big earthenware bowls, but you know what? I like this thing, even though it's plastic. I know, right? But I can see what's going on with the dough while I have it on the counter. So see, it's got the measurements. So it's right here at 2 quarts, 2 liters, and it's gonna rise until it's double to 4. So I'm gonna set it there and we'll be back as soon as I find my little button. Bye. All right, everyone. So here the dough has risen for over an hour and it is now double in volume. So I have already buttered my pans. I don't use spray oil anymore because I think it's just too wasteful. So rather I take my vegan butter, spread it around by the cube, and then spread it around with my fingers. You know, low tech, right? And then I also have my big kitchen scale. I have an electronic one as well that I use a lot when I'm baking anymore. But this one's really good for bigger jobs. And I like to measure the weight of the dough as I'm putting it in, just to kind of make sure that I really do have 1 pound loaves and they're pretty even. So I'm going to punch this down and you can see what it looks like. It's nice and puffy And when I stick a finger in it, see, the hole stays put. So I'm going to punch it down in the bin. Now, out it comes. This nice, that's the other thing I like about this bin, the container, is that it's a nice squared off piece of dough, and it's super easy then. Uh-oh, what did I do with my bread knife? Well, I guess I'm going to use mine. I'm going to use my scraper thingy instead. So I'm going to go ahead and split this up, because this will make, as I said, 4 small 1-pound loaves of bread. Actually, I have to admit, I usually weigh the dough before I even get started with this to make sure I really do have 4 pounds of dough altogether, but I forgot to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and measure, and that's just a hair over a pound. Oops, but my scale is a little, a pound. Look at this. I mean, am I good or what? Check this out. A pound. And 1 pound on the money, on the money, 'cause I'm so good at this, 'cause I've done it for so long. All right, so go ahead and then take each. Uh-oh, got a little cilantro on that one. I'm making dinner as well right now. Kind of spread it out on the counter. I don't dust it with flour or anything. It shouldn't need it. Plus it's got oil on it. Pinch the seams, so once you roll it up, pinch the seams. Turn it over. Bring over your little handy dandy pan. And then nestle that little darling right there in the pan. And there's one. And do that with all of them. I don't get too pretty with this because I don't care. This is really utilitarian bread. I'm not concerned about aesthetics. I'm concerned about texture. I'm concerned about flavor. I'm concerned that it gets cooked all the way through, but if it looks a little ugly and a little rough, I don't care. And you know what? Usually any of the roughness levels out anyway when it gets cooked. There it goes, and one more. That's that. And then I just go ahead and drape a towel over those. So give me a moment. I'm going to shove those up, and now we're going to let them rise until they're about an inch over the top of the pan. So right now they're sitting at about half an inch maybe. So I'm going to want it to get about an inch or more. It'll fill the pan a little bit more and get a full inch and nice and puffy in the pan, which will take 30 to 40 minutes altogether. All right. While that's happening, I'll heat up the oven to 375. I always bake all of this type of bread, no matter what iteration I make, at 375. Generally 30 minutes for these smaller loaves and 35 minutes for the larger loaves. But we'll go into that later. Peace out. Okay, you can see that the bread has risen. Okay, it might be a little more than an inch. It should be more than an inch. This is pretty perfect. So I'm gonna pop it in the oven. So make sure when you put it in the oven, do it as rapidly as possible and don't have them touching each other at all, because they will grow together if you do that, and you also want the air circulating, oops, around the loaves. And I'm gonna set the timer for 30 minutes. Okay, start. All right, we're up. See the kitty cat? All right, let's take a look at this spread. Ooh, look how pretty that is. So just to be sure, Mom's actually the one that taught me this, Grandma, to you guys. But with our thermal pan, I'm gonna check the temperature, and it needs to be over 200 degrees, which it is. So it is done. So given that, I'm gonna go ahead and pull these out. Look how pretty those are. Since I buttered these so well, they do. They just slip out. Be careful, don't burn yourself, whatever you do. I have. Karen has. Haven't you, Karen? You burned yourself a lot. So all you need to do is put your bread, on a rack that has a little space so that there's airflow around them. Here's the kicker though. They're gonna keep cooking even once they're out of the oven. Hold on. So whenever you do, don't cut into them before they've cooled for a bit, because you will interrupt the cooking process and they may end up doughy. It'll get weird. So let them cool with a towel over them, preferably. But before we do that, look how pretty they are. And aren't these just the perfect size? Listen to those too. If you don't have a thermopan, they should have that nice hollow sound to them. Cover them up and let them cool, and then you can slice into them. Delicious. Bye.
This is your moment, Marcia. Just be you.